this portion of our Advanced Techniques module, we want to talk about moisture removal, why it's important and how to remove it. So let's start with the why to remove it. If you live in a climate where it rains frequently or it's moist all the time, this is especially something you'd want to pay attention to. If you go to do a repair and there is water or moisture present in the brake, it can cause two problems. The first being structural. As the resin starts to flow into the brake, you may not get a proper fill. The resin may kind of get trapped and little voids may appear around the perimeter of the brake. So that can cause structural issues with the repair itself and affect the longevity of the repair. And from an aesthetic standpoint too, of course, these voids are visible to the human eye. You may even end up with sort of a ring distortion looking effect around the perimeter of the brake. So that of course would affect maybe possibly how your customer feels about the work that you did. So that's definitely something you want to be aware of, especially in a wet climate. Now when it comes to the how portion, how do I remove moisture from the brake? We're going to show you how to do that in a very simple fashion. Regardless of whether you're using the ProVac Zoom or the EcoVac, it's important to have a moisture evaporation tool. And this tool will help you to control a small amount of heat directly over the brake and help to remove that moisture. So basically what you're going to do is plug this into the cigarette lighter of the vehicle or some other power source that will accommodate a 12 volt. You're going to press the button down to heat it up. Once it's fully heated up and you should see it kind of red and hot there, then you're going to directly contact the glass over the impact point for about 12 to 15 seconds without moving it around. After the 12 to 15 seconds, you'll release the moisture evaporation tool and use an IR thermometer, and you can just measure the temperature of the glass in that area. You should be between 115 to 130 degrees. This should almost instantly start to evaporate and incinerate essentially the moisture in the brake. So the next step at that point is just to wait maybe a minute or two and then gauge the temperature again with your IR thermometer. And once the brake area, the impact point area, returns to relatively the same temperature of the rest of the windshield, then you can proceed with your repair, knowing now that you have no moisture left in the brake and you'll get a long-lasting and great-looking repair. In this portion of our Advanced Techniques module, we want to talk about vertical glass. Certainly on some RVs or on some trucks, you may find a virtually straight up and down piece of laminated glass. So how do we go about repairing that, and how are we able to have and maintain a proper vacuum and inject resin? So there are a couple of simple techniques to help you deal with this type of glass. The first is to take your tripod stand and basically unthread one of the suction cups that will be at the back of the repair process to about 3/4 of the way out. This will allow you, even on a vertical glass, to have a slight angle, which is important. The other technique that you can use in addition to that is the vertical glass adapter, which has a seal on the front, which is where it contacts the glass, and on the back side here is where the injector would contact it. So it goes between the injector and the glass. And this vertical adapter has a slight taper to it, which allows you to get a little extra angle against the glass. Certainly with the ProVac Zoom, this is less of an issue because it has a much softer seal, which allows to compensate for that slight angle that you would get with the tripod stand. And these seals are also available to be used with our older injectors as well. Now we're going to talk about how to address an extra large pit. This is a pretty common thing where the rock hits the glass and creates just a large impact point that is larger than the size of your white seal, or at least the center of the white seal. So probably the best technique to use is what we call fill and drill. So this is a situation where you would want to have a drill, your film tab, and ideally the chip fill resin or the pit fill resin. The chip fill resin is a little bit thicker, so it's a little more effective for this technique, but the pit fill resin will work as well. And basically the technique just involves dropping one drop of resin over the impact point, immediately laying the film tab down and immediately placing the light. So it's a good idea to have those things all set up and ready to go on the glass so that you can do that in a quick sequence. Then just letting that cure. Once it's cured, removing the film tab, drilling a small hole into that impact point, therefore creating a smaller impact point, and then starting your repair. So that fill and drill method is probably the most recommended technique. Now let's say that you've started a repair and you realize halfway through the repair, oh wow, this has got a really big impact point and I just can't keep a proper seal on it. Well, now you got resin already in the brake, so the fill and drill method would not work because you would end up curing that resin inside the brake, which could cause problems once you started with the brake. So in that situation, it would be a good idea to have a large pit adapter. Large pit adapter basically sits between the glass and the injector, much like the vertical pit adapter, like so, and would allow you to cover a larger area. Certainly that would work for that type of repair. However, the large pit adapter does block your view a little bit, so that's why we do recommend using the fill and drill technique whenever possible if you catch the large pit from the beginning. Another thing to mention too is that the Provac Zoom, because it does have a softer seal, tends to reduce the cases where you need to use the large pit adapter or the fill and drill method, because the seal does tend to expand a little bit more than the older seals that come with our older injectors. In this portion of advanced techniques, we want to talk about a double brake. What we mean by a double brake is two brakes that are close together and that are connected. So the first thing is to determine, are the brakes truly connected? You can typically verify this by probing the brakes a little bit and seeing if the legs connect at all. If they're not connected, then you would just want to treat them as two separate brakes, repairing one, curing it, and then repairing the other. However, if they are connected, this is where the special technique comes into play. The first step would be to take your film tab and one drop of resin, the resin that you plan to use for the repair process, and place it over the impact point of one of those two brakes. Drop the film tab, preferably a small piece, over the area so it's sealed off. Then immediately set up your injector and stand on the other side, or on the other portion of the double brake. Pull your vacuum, inject the resin, go through the whole process except for curing. You would not want to cure yet. Once the brake is filled on that side, remove the injector, swap the film tab over to the side where you just had the injector, then place the injector on the other side where the film tab was previously, start the repair process there, complete the repair process, and then once you've got to that point, then you'll cure both sides simultaneously. That is the recommended technique to repair a double brake. In this portion of advanced techniques, we want to talk about long crack repair. Certainly long crack repair is becoming even more viable with the cost of windshields going up and up and up, in addition to the services like calibration of a windshield. So more and more people are looking at it, doing it, so we're going to step you through some of the things to know when it comes to long crack repair. The first thing is to understand the difference between a long crack repair and a normal windshield repair. Windshield repairs are typically subsurface. That means that the legs are underneath the surface of the outer layer of glass. Whereas a long crack is basically a leg, in most cases, that has grown to the point that it has come to the surface. So it is basically essentially a valley facing upwards to the top surface of the outer layer of glass. So we have to deal with a long crack in a different manner. There is one other type of long crack that we should mention too, and that is long cracks that radiate from a stress, typically from the edges of the glass where there's no impact point, and maybe from the twist and flex of the windshield that's created a crack and it has spread. We do not recommend repairing that type of damage due to the fact that there can be continual flexing and stress even if it's repaired. So now let's go into the possible techniques that you would use for doing a long crack repair. Probably the first thing you would need to do is to address where is the impact point and where is the end of the crack. So once you've determined those two things, you would want to identify the end of the crack and then use your drill along with a drill bit, and with a tapping technique where you're just going zzz, 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 like so, you're going to drill into about halfway through the first layer or the outer layer of glass. Once you've done that, and you want to do that at about 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch past the end of the long crack, then you would use your replaceable tip probe along with a stand or some other light object and just tap it. And by tapping it, you should create a small bullseye within that drill hole that you have created. If you have to tap it very hard, you probably need to go a little bit deeper. If you create an immediately bullseye, that should be sufficient. The next step is then to use your fixed tip probe and pressure the leg until the surface crack now connects to your bullseye. What we've done there is we have now taken a surface crack and forced it subsurface, therefore giving it a stopping point and taking the surface tension out of that crack and allowing us to now start the repair process. So now that we've connected the bullseye on the end to the impact point on the other end, and the crack in the middle, we can start the repair process. Now you've got two different alternatives there. With these EcoVac, you have a long crack and corner edge stand like this. With the Zoom, you have the extension piece like this. In either case, you would want to load your injector with plenty of resin. In most cases, that may be 8 drops or more. In some cases, that may be 10 drops or more. And you're going to start on the end where the bullseye was just created. And the next thing is just kind of choosing which resin would you want to use. So that's going to depend on your climate and also on the type of brake. We've got 3 resins which can be used for long crack repair. The first we're going to mention is 2010 gray, or our all-weather gray resin. This is great for moderate climates where there's not dramatic temperature swings, and for relatively short long cracks, something that's not real long. That's a great resin for doing that. It flows real quickly, it hides the brake well. Now if you're in a climate with a bigger temperature swings, or you may want to use the Crackwell 2000, which is thicker, has a little bit more flexibility, and while it may take a little bit longer to flow, it will give you better longevity, especially on a very long crack in a climate that has extreme weathers. Now there's one in between this as well, which is the Crackwell 1000, which is kind of a moderate resin in between of those two, which you can use on tight cracks that might be a little bit longer as well. So once you've chosen your resin, you would load up your injector, set up your corner edge extension or your long crack extension on the bullseye, pull a quick vacuum, start to inject resin. Once the resin fills the bullseye, then you're basically just going to slide the injector along with its stand, using some additional suction cup sealant on your suction cups and allowing that to kind of slide back and forth. So sliding along and watching the resin move forward as you progressively work your way through the crack. Behind you, as you move, you're going to lay film taps down, possibly with a few drops of extra resin, the resin that you're using, and until you're just going to continue that process until you reach the impact point, from where the crack radiates. Once you reach that point, then you will want to make sure you've got film tabs and resin sealing up that entire brake. At that point, we would recommend that you go ahead and cure the long crack. You may have to move your light a couple times to cure it completely. And once you've done that, then you would start your impact point just like a normal repair, and that should give you a great looking long crack repair.